his party, Nixon offered himself as the man who could bring order out of the turmoil of 1968.
When the strongest nation in the world can be tied down for 4 years in a war in Vietnam with no end in sight, when the nation with the greatest tradition of the rule of law is plagued by unprecedented lawlessness, when a nation has been known for a century for equality of opportunity is torn by unprecedented racial violence, then it's time for new leadership for the United States of America.
Republicans once again pinned their presidential hopes on Richard Nixon. To them and to many in the press, he seemed a new Nixon, better prepared than the man who had lost in 1960. But the Democratic frontrunner Hubert Humphrey said he'd seen it all before.
They started the renewal job in 1952. Brand new Nixon. There was some reason for it, too. Then they had another renewal job in 1956. Then they had another renovation operation in 1960. Then when he went to run for governor in California in 1962, they renewed him again. And then in 1964, another touch-up. And now I read about the new Nixon of 1968. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody that had his political face lifted so many times can't be very new.
Boating in the Florida Keys, Nixon was relaxed and confident. He was running far ahead of Humphrey in the polls, and the Vietnam War was splintering the Democrats. At their convention in Chicago, the anti-war wing of the party pressed for an end to the bombing and a negotiated withdrawal of U.S. troops. But Humphrey stuck by President Johnson's policy.
And I think that withdrawal would be totally unrealistic and would be a catastrophe.
As the Democrats fought over Vietnam, Nixon avoided the issue, promising only that he would find an honorable end to the war. Along with millions of Americans, he watched on television as anti-war protests outside the convention hall exploded into violence. In the chaos, Nixon saw an opportunity. A few days later, he moved through the same streets in a motorcade. 400,000 people turned out to cheer him. He chose the city which had seen open war among the Democrats to sound one of the central themes of his campaign.
This is a nation of laws, and as Abraham Lincoln has said, no one is above the law, no one is below the law, and we're going to enforce the law, and Americans should remember that if we're going to have law and order.
The emphasis on law and order appealed to millions of Americans. Nixon's television commercials hammered it home.
In recent years, crime in this country has grown 9 times as fast as population. At the current rate, the crimes of violence in America will double by 1972. We cannot accept that kind of future for America. We owe it to the decent and law-abiding citizens of America to take the offensive against the criminal forces that threaten their peace and their security, and to rebuild respect for law across this country. I pledge to you the way...
To the Democrats, Nixon's call for law and order played to the worst in Americans.
But you can't vote your anger. You have to vote your hopes. You can't vote your hates. You have to vote your hopes.
The preamble to the Constitution doesn't just say double the rate of convictions. It doesn't just say law and order. It says to ensure justice, and if Mr. Nixon hasn't read it, then I'll send him a copy.
But Nixon had a feel for the issues that moved the middle American voter. They were the same issues that moved him. Blaming liberal Democrats for the upheaval in the country, he sought to rally a new Republican majority.
A new voice that is being heard across America today. It is not the voice of a single person. It's the voice of a majority of Americans who have not been the protesters, who have not been the shouters. The great majority finally have become angry. Not angry with hate, but angry, my friends, because they love America and they don't like what has been happening to America for the last 4 years.
You've just heard Richard Nixon refer to you, among all these other people, as the forgotten Americans. What do you think he's referring to?
Well, I sort of think he's talking about the people that are paying the taxes, that are supporting the schools, the churches, the people that they are sort of forgotten because everything's aimed at welfare and things like that.
Nixon's call to the forgotten Americans appealed to a broad band of voters, mostly white, middle class, hawkish, patriotic. It was a group that felt ignored and excluded in the upheavals of the 60s. And the strategy seemed to be working. Nixon held his strong lead into the fall. Then, just before the election, President Johnson suddenly stopped the bombing of North Vietnam. Humphrey surged in the polls.
We're going to have the biggest election surprise that America's known in 20 years. We're going to win.